that was all designed to send a chilling threat through the presenters at GB News. We will get rid of you if you step outside what our acceptable narrative is. But the great thing is that folk are waking up, they're realizing that you can no longer trust organizations,
Yeah.
trust individuals. They are so terrified now of the off communists who came for me, came for Laurence Fox. GB News gave in.
I'm Jasmine Birtles, and I'm thrilled to be able to say that I've managed to persuade Dan Wootton to join me today. Dan, hello there.
You didn't need to persuade me at all, Jasmine. You know I absolutely adore you. You've been a guest a couple of times now on my new show, right? And you're obviously on my GB News
Yeah.
show as well.
Yes, exactly. So your new show is Dan Wootton Outspoken, and you can get it on YouTube and also on Substack. Is that right?
Yeah, so all of my writing, my exclusive journalism now is hosted on Substack. And Substack, as you know,
Mm.
is such an important growing platform
Yes.
because it's where we, as independent journalists, can feel like we have a degree of freedom. I mean, I know it's easy to say because so many companies have previously claimed this, but Substack actually do believe in free speech, and they've proven that because they've come under loads of pressure from the liberal elite to get rid of particular Substacks, and they haven't done so.
Good one. Yeah, that is very good to know, as you say. I mean, it's been difficult for Telegram. Goodness knows, what's allowed and what isn't allowed on YouTube. You're also on Rumble, I hear.
I am on Rumble because I really believe in Rumble
Mm.
as a platform. I think it's really important that there is a free speech alternative to YouTube. Now, the problem is, given I'm based in the UK, we are not really embracing the whole Rumble revolution yet. Certainly not in the same way as Americans are, because you have Steve Bannon on there, you have Dave Rubin on there, you have Dan Bongino on there. Dan and Dave are both investors now in Rumble, and they were big supporters of me when I left GB News. So I really do believe in what Rumble's trying to do. I just would like more Brits to get on there and support it.
Exactly. And now you've mentioned GB News, and for a while, GB News was a place where we free speechers, anti-establishment people were congregating. It seemed like the place to be. They were the only voice really in a morass of mainstream media excessiveness. But that seems to have changed. What's happened with GB News, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously for me, it's pretty heartbreaking actually, because for folk who don't know, I was one of the launch presenters at GB News. I was the first presenter who was announced after Andrew Neil, who was the chairman. I hosted the first regular show on GB News. I gave up a lot, you could argue, in terms of the mainstream media in order to go there. I had a very comfortable career with Murdoch as a columnist at The Sun and hosting a show on Talk, but I so believed in what GB News set out to be. And while there are still some really brilliant people there, and you could argue it's certainly better than Sly News and the British Backing Corporation and Woke ITV, as I call them,
Yeah.
it's lost what its original mission was. And I think you know that, Jasmine. I mean, you were a regular guest. You
Mm.
heard a lot on Neil Oliver's show. Well, Neil Oliver isn't even broadcast live anymore on GB News because they are so terrified now of the off communists who came for me, came for Laurence Fox. GB News gave in. And it's hard, as I say, because in some ways you think, well, is it better that there is something on the center right? But it's a very different place to the GB News that I inhabited with the likes of Mark Steyn. And, it was for a period there, it was truly exciting. And we were doing some really amazing stuff and having conversations that had never taken place on British TV before. And I guess that's why the establishment felt so strongly about shutting it down.
Well, it did, didn't it? I mean, they tried to shut it down even before it even started, and it's been out at it constantly with, the trying to stop advertisers advertising. As you say, the off communists have been hating on it from the start. And I mean, I agree. They do seem to have capitulated, not completely. Bev Turner's doing a great job, as you say.
Yes, yes.
It would be great to still have Neil Oliver, but I'm not sure what's happening there. And I just wonder, do you think they could have stood against them? Really, could they have said, "Don't care
Yes.
what you're going to do, close us down if you want," kind of thing?
Yes, exactly. But they had to take that aggressive approach from the start, and they didn't. What they thought is they thought, oh, I know, we can sacrifice Mark Steyn. Maybe they'll then leave us alone. Oh, God, okay, we'll sacrifice Laurence Fox and Dan Wootton now. Maybe they'll leave us alone. And actually, that didn't happen. What happened is that Ofcom, the Ofcomunists, were empowered and they saw, oh, they're listening to us now. They're scared. They're worried about our threats.
Mm.
And actually, can you imagine if GB News had stood its ground and said, come and close us down if you want. We believe we're following the regulations. And actually, it would have been a much better thing for GB News to be closed down
Mm.
by a
Mm.
state entity. I don't believe that would ever have happened. But if it did, GB News would all of a sudden be this very powerful force in the independent space,
Yeah.
just like the Daily Wire is in the US. And unfortunately, they didn't do that. Although I would argue, fortunately for me, because obviously that's what I'm now trying to do with Outspoken.
Yes, exactly. So that you have set yourself up on YouTube, Rumble, and Substack as Dan Wootton Outspoken, and there are a few others who are setting things up on YouTube, some on Substack. Do you think this is where the new media is? Because it looks to me like mainstream media is pretty much almost dead. Really,
Yeah,
it's
mainstream media is
dying
on its
fast.
deathbed. So what's going to happen is that the government, the establishment, the civil service, they can't cope with the fact that the mainstream media is dying because the mainstream media is what keeps them in business. It's what censors people like you, Jasmine, people like me, people like Neil Oliver, people like Bev Turner, all of the folk who were speaking out during the COVID pandemic, for example. So they want to keep the mainstream media alive. So what they're going to try and do is make it very difficult for someone like me to broadcast because they're going to put loads of pressure on Google, which owns YouTube, for
Mm,
example.
mm,
But,
mm.
I do hope that Elon Musk has shifted the Overton window. We saw Mark Zuckerberg admit that the type of censorship that Facebook was doing during the COVID pandemic was completely outrageous. Now, we know that. I mean, I was censored on Facebook all the time. I still am. They have turned away from news. But I do just wonder if Elon Musk, and I hope and pray this is right, has shifted that Overton window. And now there's a different sort of conversation taking place. But yes, they are going to do everything they possibly can to keep the mainstream media alive. But the great thing is that folk are waking up, they're realizing that you can no longer trust
Mm.
organizations,
Yeah.
trust individuals. Because if you think about this, it makes a lot of sense, Jasmine. An individual has a lot less chance of being captured than an organization
Mhm. True.
because especially if you're in the independent space and like me you're saying, because I'd always be very honest about this, I have no billionaire investor, I have no one behind me pulling the strings, I am completely reliant on my audience to support me, but all of a sudden that means I also don't have billionaires investors in my ear saying, oh, we'd really not like you to say that. Obviously I was not very good at following the rules, Jasmine, which was one of the reasons uh, why I ended up leaving GB News.
Me
But
too. Yeah.
I do believe that people in this new climate are going to start trusting the individual. And what's exciting about that is there's lots of ways that individuals can work together. You've seen great cross-pollination already in the independent space. For example, the other day, I watched a fascinating interview that Neil Oliver hosted on his own YouTube with Candace Owens, who obviously now has her own YouTube. She
Yes.
has been demonetized by YouTube,
Yeah.
but luckily for her, she's not in a position where she really has to financially worry. I launched Outspoken by appearing on Megyn Kelly's independent YouTube. So it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we're completely on our own. We're going to work with lots of like-minded folk who are in the independent space. But what we don't have is a shared ownership, and it's that shared ownership. And you've seen it with GB News. So one of the main investors at GB News is now the owner of The Spectator. He has hired Michael Gove as the editor of The Spectator. Well, come on, look at what Michael Gove did over the
Uh,
COVID pandemic.
Horrendous. Yeah, it's a real. it's a slap in the face, to be honest, for those who are anti-establishment, who are trying to get somewhere. You think, really, Michael Gove? Oh, for goodness sake. So do
Well,
you
I
think?
wouldn't trust the Spectator anymore as a result of that, you see.
Well, exactly. This is the problem. There's practically nothing, I would say, in the mainstream space, and I'm still working in it here and there, every now and then. But there's practically nothing that I'd say, oh, go and read that, go and look at that, go and
Oh, and I
watch
mean, don't get me wrong, I still would trust Douglas Murray, Rod Liddell. So there are some great individuals who are
it.
still working in the mainstream, but I care much more about them as an individual than I do about where he's publishing his work. And I think that's what's really critical. I mean, look, Douglas Murray is now selling out arenas across America. That
Mm.
shows you his power as an individual. The fact that he might still be a weekly columnist for The Spectator, I think, is completely irrelevant. People are going to find his work and find his writing and find his videos wherever he is.
That's interesting because I've had a friend who contacted me about Neil Oliver because she's been watching GB News since the start. And she said, what's happened to GB News? Where's Neil Oliver? There's nothing to watch anymore. I want to watch Neil Oliver. So essentially, what I need to say to her is what I said actually was go to his YouTube channel.
Find him independently because he's not censored there. I mean, obviously, we can't lie. There are big tech censorship, but when YouTube came for him recently for an interview that he did, he simply took it off YouTube and said you can find the whole thing on Rumble and I think on X as well, which are not censored. So obviously, you've still we can't lie and say that there's no censorship whatsoever if you're operating on YouTube. But the great thing is now there are alternatives. So, for example, with Outspoken, I have my after show where we discuss issues that sometimes are not palatable for YouTube. And quite recently, I hosted a segment with Lilani Dowding and June Slater, which involved a lot of controversial conversation around vaccination and big pharma. Now, okay, it's a real shame that I couldn't host that discussion on YouTube. Of course, that's a shame. But the great thing is I have the flexibility to say, okay, but I'm going to post this to X instead. So our members get the exclusive conversation via my subscription, and then I'm able to post it to a wider audience on X. So there are options, but I think it's a heck of a lot safer than being part of a big organization who is just saying now, you can't get us a strike on YouTube. You can't lose us this advertiser. Stop talking about this. Stop talking about that. And the evolution of what has happened with Neil Oliver at GB News. And I actually saw Neil the other day after I know we were there, Jasmine,
Yeah.
after the third anniversary of the Together Declaration event. And we had a great catch up. And all I think I would say is that Neil Oliver has been treated horrendously by GB News.
It's
But
very,
I'll
very
keep
sad.
quiet.
Yeah, it's like killing the golden goose, I think, because Neil is hugely popular, has always been hugely popular. He has a very, very loyal following, as do you. So it doesn't make sense to me to get rid of people who are popular. It's weird.
But they don't, they want people who are controlled, Jasmine.
Mm.
So they want people who, for example, are not going to post what they really think on
Mm.
X.
Mm.
And you'll notice that if you really look into it, look at some of their presenters, they are now captured, they are controlled. And that was always going to be the consequence of suspending me,
Mm.
suspending Laurence Fox, not backing Calvin Robinson, not backing Mark Steyn. That was all designed to send a chilling threat through the presenters at GB News. We will get rid of you if you step outside what our acceptable narrative is.
Mm.
And they are warned, the presenters at GB News are now warned constantly about what they post on social media. Now, some are brave, like Bev Turner, and say, to hell with it, I'm going to say what I think. But there are a lot of others, and I'm sure you can work out who I'm talking about, who have very much accepted that because they want the paycheck. And look, to an extent, I understand that.
Mm.
But I was never prepared to do that. And anyone who was at GB News knows that I was always pushing back against censorship, against control. And obviously, it ended up with my departure from the station because I wouldn't apologize for Laurence Fox saying that he didn't want to shag someone on air.
So I think for people who are watching who are thinking, right, where do I go to get the truth? or something close to the truth, which they know they're not going to get in mainstream media. I'm guessing it's basically a question, if they haven't already, of just abandoning mainstream media and then looking online for the people that they trust, people like you, people like Neil Oliver, people like, as Candace Owens, or whoever it is. We need to look for the individuals.
Absolutely. And the thing is, there's a great network now. So, for example, the thing about Substack, and actually we need to do this for each other, Jasmine, because we haven't
Yeah.
done this yet, but there's a whole recommendation network. So, for example, via my Substack, I recommend Winston Marshall, I recommend Konstantin Kisin, I represent Matt Goodwin. People can actually go in and see who am I following, for example. Now, I'm not saying people want to follow everyone who I'm following, but it at least gives you an idea of what type of journalism is out there. Frank Furedi, Patrick O'Flynn. I mean, there's lots of people who I have great respect for, who I follow. Now, a lot of people will do free subscriptions. I try whenever I can to pay, but it's obviously really difficult. I understand what the
Yeah.
climate is like, but just remember these journalists are trying to make a living. They're wanting to do original journalism. They're wanting to make great video product, which does cost money. But the advice that I gave at the Together Declaration event was stop paying your license fee and put that money, or at least some of that money, ring fence it, just so you're paying for some of your favorite journalists each month. And actually, the thing about Substack that's great is you get all the newsletters direct into your inbox. As long as you're topping it up with X for breaking news, I actually don't find now that I need to read a newspaper. I don't want, I don't
No,
trust the newspapers,
right.
having worked in them and
Yeah.
seen how they operate, but I don't need to. I can get my breaking news from X, where there are a lot of commentators who I trust and who will point me in the direction to the types of stories that the mainstream media are doing wrong. Of course, for my job, the research for my job, I consume a lot of mainstream media, but that is to critique, to
Yes.
analyze, and to expose to the world some of the disgusting tactics that the mainstream media use on a daily basis. But in terms of my personal consumption, I much rather now hearing direct from the people who I trust on Substack and X. And then, of course, I get my visual component, my TV component from YouTube and
Yeah.
Rumble. And the great thing is now, because technology is so advanced, and I assume most people who are watching us here will know that it's very easy now to stream these shows direct to your TV.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do, and I know people, and I'm one of them. I sort of I stream. I just watch Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, and that's basically, as you say, that's my TV element. I try to keep myself off it too much, but
Like a bit
that
addictive,
seems to
don't
be where people are going, really.
we? Yes. Yeah, no, it totally is. There are alternatives now. And look, there are great people who are doing really interesting things on YouTube, in the political space as well. So you've got people like Maya Tusi and Paul Thorpe, Alex Phillips, who's a talk TV presenter. She's recently launched her own Substack too. So I actually feel like now there are a plethora of options. And to
Yes.
be honest, even when I was still at GB News and happy, I was very aware that this was where the media landscape was heading.
Yeah, I agree. Dan, that's so useful. Thank you very, very much for giving us that
Thank you.
update and pointing us in the direction where we can look for the sort of news that we need to have to find the truth. Thank you so much. I hope to get you on again another time. And
And you will have to come back to Outspoken, Jasmine, and next time we will plug the Substack.
oh,
Because I don't
yes, that would be great. That would be lovely. Thank you. Yes, Dan Wootton, Outspoken on YouTube, Rumble, and Substack. Go see him there. Thank you, Dan.